I wanted to make this video to be a little bit of a foreshadowing of some things to come. One of the things that I do want to talk about, because they are kind of a hobby of mine, and that is conspiracy theories. As some of you may have guessed, I do appreciate thinking through conspiracy theories. And probably over the last few years, I've gained a bit of a reputation as a conspiracy theorist because of the stance that I took around COVID. But where I think the conversation often goes with conspiracy theories is that they are automatically the realm of conjecture or craziness, paranoia, seeing evidence where none exists, being right-wing for some reason, being in a whole host of camps of undesirables, right? What I would like to do is examine the relationship between science and conspiratorial thinking. All science starts with conjecture. It starts with an hypothesis. That is, an idea that could be used to explain some phenomenon in the world. It is a method of thinking hypothetically and then applying a set of experimental or logical techniques that can falsify certain claims. For a conspiracy theory to be scientific, all it needs to do is become falsifiable. That's all. The reason I enjoy thinking about conspiracy theories is that they help give you a frame of reference that is what you might call non-standard. So there's sort of like a mainstream narrative about how the world is, how human society is, how power structures are. There's kind of a mainstream narrative according to which we're all broadly accepting of as true. But the problem is that it's not easy to say what is true. And one of the very specific reasons we have science and that we have critical thinking and tools and methods that can distinguish fact from fiction or lies from truth is so that we don't fall into worldviews that are unsupported by evidence or that are better explained by a different way of thinking. So a great example of a worldview shift is the Copernican revolution, in which the Earth revolves around the sun. According to the mainstream dogma of the day, it was obvious that everything revolved around the Earth, that the stars, the sun, the moon, everything came and went, and we were the center of it. But the thing is, even though it looked that way, as has been famously said by, I think it was Richard Dawkins, actually, famously said that, well, yes, it may have looked as though the sun revolved around the Earth, but what would it have looked like if it looked like the Earth revolved around the sun? And so the point here is that sometimes the same information, when interpreted differently, can give you very different results. And so the theory of what's called the heliocentric model of the cosmos would suggest that we can explain all of the same observations using a slightly different interpretation. So the mainstream interpretation was that the Earth was the center of the universe. But the heliocentric model used all the same observations, the same data, but because it posited that the Earth was not the center and the sun, in fact, was the center, the reframing, the different theory was able to explain patterns of events in a simpler way. And therefore, according to the idea of Occam's razor, that the simpler model or the simpler theory is more likely true, the one that has the fewest assumptions. By switching to a heliocentric model, we were able to more simply explain the movement of the heavenly bodies throughout the cosmos. And so while the observations that we make might remain the same, the simplifying principle underneath those observations has greater explanatory power. Even further than that, by having a good theory, we can actually make better predictions. And so in what's called the geocentric model, this is where the Earth is the center of the universe, it is difficult to explain why the heavenly bodies appear to move chaotically through the sky. And so therefore, it's very difficult to predict exactly where they're going to be without really complicated models for how they move around. However, under the heliocentric model, where everything revolves around in an orbital pattern around the sun, at least in our local solar system, and the Earth is itself revolving around the sun, creating its own changing frame of reference. by having a better model, we're able to make better predictions about the future. Okay, so what does this have to do with conspiracy theories? We would all like to believe that the world is a complex place full of randomness, full of people just trying to do their best, right? That our politicians, our governors, the media, etc., they are trying their best to faithfully portray reality in an honest and broadly accurate way. And that save for a few bad actors, that we are largely being told how things are according to direct observation. And that even though, yes, some people fall into certain narratives, some people fall into certain belief systems, that overall there's no grand conspiracy. There's no group of people behind the scenes trying to arrange events. Now, on the one hand, taken to its extreme, the idea of a small cabal of people controlling everything on the planet at its extreme end is obviously ridiculous. But at the same time, at the other end, where everything is random and no one is exerting any kind of force or will over the population, over information, over narratives, that they're not bent in a particular direction with a particular purpose under a particular ideology or to a particular narrative, to suggest that that never happens is equally absurd. If we were to look into a conspiracy theory, we would need to start with this search space. We can probably debunk immediately the explanation at both ends. But the real question is, okay, how much or how far along this spectrum do we have to go before we have a pretty good and accurate answer? How much is our information controlled? How much do politicians and large corporations, media companies, newscasters, pharmaceutical companies, billionaires, people in the tech industry, bankers, these kinds of things, how much precisely do they control? And how possible is it for us to reveal? So these are the kinds of questions that I would like to have a dialogue about, because this is something that not only have I spent quite an amount of time on contemplating that question to try to understand where along the continuum is the right theory, is the right explanation for what we observe in this world. But more importantly, the reason I'm interested in this is because fundamentally, I don't consider myself a conspiracy theorist. Fundamentally, I consider myself a scientist. And a scientist is somebody who examines hypothetical situations, looks for themselves into the evidence, and reports in the most transparent way possible their findings. And so in that way, I consider myself more a scientist than a conspiracy theorist. However, I can apply my scientific thinking and my ability to think hypothetically, and then use logic and experimentation to test my theory by making predictions. I can do that and apply that to any realm of human philosophical inquiry. So what I would like to do over the next couple of days at least, and possibly even a week or more, is I would like to use the scientific method of hypothesis generation and experimental design to articulate the plausibility. I'm just talking about plausibility. I'm not talking about evidence. I'm not talking about who they are or what they do or how they operate. I'm not trying to paint a picture of any particular group, any particular organization. I do, however, want to discuss the possibility or the hypothesis of the conspiratorial narrative that there is a group of people, either very large or very small, either highly competent or very bold, but overall incompetent. It's not important. What we're trying to do is establish the plausibility of the idea. If the idea is plausible, then we can establish the credibility of that idea. As in, okay, we've agreed that it's plausible. What kind of likelihood can we ascribe to that kind of worldview? And if we can ascribe a probability that is worth further investigation, then we can start assigning certain predictions, right? So this is what I want to talk about in the first sort of chapter, let's say, is I want to talk about the plausibility, the likelihood, and predictions that would come about under a more conspiratorial narrative. Okay, so that's the first part. I'm going to end it here. And in a future video, and in the next video, what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to start talking about the methods we can use to turn conspiracy narratives into something that fits the realm of scientific inquiry. Okay, so that's where I'm going from here. I just want to talk about conspiracy narratives. And like I said, because these are fun. That's the thing. As a scientist, what we need to do is be able to detach ourselves from our view of the world. If we are really attached to a certain view of the world, then it makes us narrow in our thinking. However, if we can expand our mind, if we can consider possibilities without necessarily accepting them, but understand what they would predict about the world and be cognizant of those predictions, then we're in a better place to start evaluating the truth of our situation and interrogating reality in such a way that we can come to meaningful, logical, rational, clear conclusions about how we should behave in that situation.